balanced view on politics in today's world. Based on facts, born of rationality, common sense, and logic. Providing context on today's events, this is American Perspective with Rick Thomas.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to American Perspective. I am your host, Rick. Well, it is the eve of Easter. Easter Sunday is tomorrow. It's a time of gathering and looking forward to the return of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Going off to church and everything else is what a lot of people who don't normally go to church do. They take off and they go to church and they try and make up for the year. It seems like Christmas and Easter is like the two biggest attendees when it comes to church. Sad, but true. Anyway, for me, tonight marks exactly 6 years. 6 years ago, on April the 4th, in 2020, was my very first broadcast. So I have been doing live streaming for 6 years now. And I got to tell you, I mean, granted, my streams haven't changed a whole heck of a lot over the course of the last like 3 or 4 years, because I kind of got it all figured out after the first couple. But yeah, it's kind of amazing to think that I've basically held in there long enough to be to have done this for 6 years. And it's all due to you people. It's all due to everybody showing up. You know, everyone showing up and having things to say in the chat and those kinds of things. Although tonight it's probably going to be a little thin just because of the fact that it's Easter weekend, Easter Sunday and stuff like that. So, but anyway, so there we go. Yeah, I know, 6 years. 6 years. Well, I'll be coming up on my 1,000th episode in September. It looks like it's probably going to hit the 15th or 16th. And of course that depends on if I keep a steady days every day kind of streaming. I know if there's one day in June that I'm not going to be able to stream because I'm doing something else, but generally speaking, I mean, I'm probably going to be somewhere around September 14th, 15th for my 1,000th episode, if things go right between now and then. And I don't take any other days off other than that one on June 20th. So, but anyway, that's something to look forward to. I know I'm looking forward to it. You know, my buddy Steven Stiles, he started doing a podcast as well not that long ago, and he thought that because he was doing more episodes than I was at the time, that he was going to overtake me. And then I decided to switch to a 6-day-a-week format, and well, that ain't happening. Anyway, sorry, Steven. Anyway, yeah. So, yep. So there you go. So my anticipation is September 15th or 16th. Those are the 2 days, somewhere in that realm, somewhere in there. You know, right around the 15th of September is when I'll be hitting the 1,000th episode, and I don't know. Well, I got to figure out what I'm going to do for that, whether or not I'm going to do like a long program. It's during the week, so that might be kind of tough, but I may do, I don't know if I'm going to do like a best of or something. Anyway, we'll get it all figured out. All right. Tonight we're going to talk quite a bit about oil. And no, I'm going to try and keep from getting too sciencey, but the question was asked, and Coco's not even in the chat tonight. Hopefully she'll show up later. But Coco sent in a question of the week with regards to the gas prices. And so I've put together a I'm going to say a fairly comprehensive overview of what goes into our gas prices and gas, petroleum products, and things of that nature. So we're going to get into that later on this evening. Also, the Artemis 2 ship has now officially crossed the threshold. They are closer to the moon than they are to the Earth at this moment. And so they are looming and getting closer and closer to the moon. So there you go. Also, as well, I don't know if anybody heard, but apparently the libs thought that Donald Trump was in the hospital. We'll get to that in just a minute. But first, let's go ahead and get the pledge going. And I believe that I forgot who's doing the pledge. That's what I believe. So give me just a second here. I gotta find it. Who did? Oh yes. Ironically, he's not even here. 3 Chevy is up for tonight's pledge. So if you are of mine, please stand, remove your hat if you're wearing one like me. Place your hand over your heart and follow along with 3 Chevy as he recites the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And, of course, I thank you, 3 Chevy, for that wonderful rendition of the pledge. If you would like to hear your rendition of the pledge played here on the program, all you need to do is record yourself reciting, performing the pledge in your style. Take that audio file, video file, whatever kind of file, attach it to an email, send that email, address it to fans, FANS, at AmericanPerspective.online. That's fans at AmericanPerspective.online. And I will, of course, get you into the rotation. I've got 23 of these. I'd like to have 26 by the end of 2026, so I need 3 more. All you need to do is record yourself and then send it in. And if you use your phone to record, you can use the share option. That's the SHARE option, the share option, or the to send it off to me and send it to fans, FANS, at AmericanPerspective.online. And I will, of course, get things going, get it into the rotation. All right. Tonight's headline sponsor is none other than the Institute on the Constitution. And you can go to their website by going to theamericanview.com. That's theamericanview, all one word, .com. And they invite you to take three action steps to help them in their mission to restore the constitutional republic through grassroots education from a biblical worldview. Those 3 steps are actually pretty easy. Step number 1 is very easy. It's called praying. Never forget to pray for your country. And you can go and connect up with them. You can add your email to get on an email list and get a daily prayer sent to your email inbox, so you can pray with them every single day. Second step to restore the republic is to study. Now, what do you study, you ask? Well, you study the Constitution, you study our history, you study how we were founded, and I mean the real story, not the 1619 BS project, but the real founding story. And you can start that study journey by signing up right here. Woo-hoo, right here above my head, there's a form. If you go to theamericanview.com/study and you'll get to that form, all you do is enter your first and last name and then your email address, and you'll be sent the 100% free online course, 12 short lessons, 1 to your inbox every single week. And you'll be able to pick them up. It's automatically sent to you every single week, and you'll be able to get those. They're 15 to 20 minutes long, so it's very easy to do and learn about our historical founding and the U.S. Constitution. It's a nationally recognized course, 100% free, 100% online. And then after you do that, you can go and check out their other courses, like some of their in-person courses. For an example, like the U.S. Constitution course in Piedmont, South Dakota that just happened on the 1st. That's right. Then you have The Truth of America's Founding, Your Heritage and Mine in Lewes, Delaware. That one's happening next Saturday. Yeah, you can go and pick that up. The U.S. Constitution course in Kettering, Ohio is 12 days away on April 16th. And then on May 9th, they have The Truth of America's Founding in Ridgely, Maryland. And that's just a smattering of their upcoming in-person courses. And once you do that, then the next step is obviously to act. Well, you're already kind of acting by learning, but what they mean by acting is taking a class, exploring the live classes, becoming a member, or better yet, become an instructor for the Institute on the Constitution. Become an instructor for them today. They have 4 different instructor levels. You can find out how to become an IOTC instructor by heading over to theamericanview.com, click on ACT, and click on the, obviously, the Become an Instructor link. And you can watch this short little video to figure out how to become an IOTC instructor. And then you can also look at their video of 5 steps or 5 tips for a successful class. 5 tips for a successful class. And then you can also pick up the instructor kit, which is in the shop, by the way. Up in the upper right-hand corner, there's a red button known as the shop. You click on that, and you can go to their online store that has all kinds of educational resources, the instructor materials. They have apparel from Self-Evident Ministries, who is the new merger that just happened, or my personal favorite, go to the Legacy Library. Yes, the Legacy Library. And my personal favorite in the Legacy Library is the Leather Constitution book. Yes, I have one of these in my hot little hands right here. This is a leather-bound U.S. Constitution. It has, according to my Whiskey Warrior P1's, sexy rounded corners. It's got 1/8 of an inch of Saddleback leather wrapped around pages that are water and tear resistant. No cheap glue here, folks. It is stitched all the way through the binding. The pages contained within in the leather. It's got a 100-year warranty against materials and manufacturing defects, such that if you have a problem with this thing in that time period, they will go ahead and either you can send it back to them and they will either fix it or replace it for free. It is buddy tested, buddy approved, Billy tasted, Billy approved. And my youngest Whiskey Warrior has confirmed that the information contained within will help you to achieve your civics badge in Scouts. Will probably also help you to achieve your civics exam as well as your naturalization test. It's all right here in this book. This wonderful remanufactured or reprint, I should say, of the U.S. Constitution. And of course, I refer to the U.S. Constitution quite a bit here on the program, and this is what I use every single time that I do. So head on over to theamericanview.com, click on the red button over in the upper right-hand corner called Shop, and visit the Legacy Library to pick yours up today. And I thank the Institute on the Constitution for their support and sponsorship of this program. Go to theamericanview.com and check out all of their wonderful information and gifts and books and all kinds of things that you can go and take a look at. Tonight, I'm drinking out of the Jefferson's Reserve whiskey. There it is. It's the bourbon whiskey. And it is, of course, in the fantastic, wonderful of a pair gift From my Whiskey Warrior P1s, it takes stones to drink with whiskey, because there are the requisite stones in the bottom of the glass. You can see them there, those black cubes. They're in there chilling it like a villain. Anyway, first sip. That Jefferson's Reserve is good. It's good. All right. Well, Trump warned Iran, said, hey, you have 48 hours from my drawing a line in the sand. You've got 48 hours before all hell rains down upon you. 48 hours. Now, that was today. Then he warned Iran about that. And he basically is saying, hey, you've got 48 hours to reach a deal or reopen the Strait of Hormuz. And he's escalating pressure as tensions are rising in the Middle East. So there you are. In a post on Truth Social, Trump wrote, remember when I gave Iran 10 days to make a deal or open up the strait? Time is running out, 48 hours before all hell will rain down on them. Glory be to God. President Donald J. Trump. Well, the warning comes as the United States and Iran remain at odds over the vital waterway, strategically vital waterway, which is that narrow passage between Iran and where is it? Between Iran and Oman, that serves as a key route for global oil shipments. So, there you go. Yeah. Message to Iran, choose wisely. Now, keep in mind, roughly 1/5 of the world's oil supply moves through the Strait of Hormuz. So any disruption in that that course is going to make things difficult, which we'll talk about in a little while. But anyway. Oh, you know what? Here we go. I failed. Oh my gosh, I failed. All right, let's get back to... Yes, I failed. I failed because the first segment is supposed to always be on this day in American history. And what's sad is my my unofficial producer, she was in the chat and she told me the order. She told me the order, but she let me get away with slipping that first thing in. Yeah, now I'm being chastised. I'm being told bad Rick. Anyway, we're on this day in American history. We read from the American Patriots Almanac, written by William J. Bennett and John T.E. Cribb. It is chock full of all kinds of little factoids about this wonderful country, greatest on earth. Wonderful country that we call home. So for tonight, we're going to talk about none other than the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. I've been to the mountaintop. On the evening of April 4th, 1968, 39-year-old Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. was struck down by an assassin's bullet while standing on a motel balcony in Memphis, Tennessee. King had been receiving death threats for more than a decade, but he never shied away from making public appearances. The night before his death, he had spoken at a Memphis church. We've got some difficult days ahead, but it really doesn't matter with me now because I've been to the mountaintop, he said, and I don't mind. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place, but I'm not concerned about it now. I just want to do God's will. And he's allowed me to go up to the mountain, and I've looked over, and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. Following evening, Dr. King was leaning over a balcony railing at the Lorraine Motel where he was staying when a shot sounded and he fell dead. James Earl Ray, a drifter and escaped convict, was convicted of the assassination. As reports of King's murder were broadcast, riots broke out in hundreds of cities and towns. In some places, looting and burning continued for days until the National Guard restored order. Those were times when America felt like a runaway train ride, even as the millions mourned the loss of an extraordinary leader. They redoubled their efforts to make their country a place of which King would be proud. A memorial plaque at the site of the assassination quotes Genesis 37, verse 19 and 20. It reads, "They said to one another, Behold, here cometh the dreamer. Let us slay him, and we shall see what becomes of his dreams." The inscription challenges each of us to see what will become of his dreams. And that is tonight's On This Day in American History. Which, to be completely honest, makes last night's story about the Artemis question, the reporter asking the Artemis crew member, the one black Artemis crew member, regarding his race, being the first black astronaut to go toward the moon or around the moon or whatever it was. It certainly makes that tonight's On This Day in American History ring more true. Because Dr. Martin Luther King, his dream was that his daughters would grow up in a world where they were judged not by the color of their skin, but rather by the content of their character. And as of right now, the leftist lunatics of the Democrat Party, they do not want to qualify individuals by the content of their character. They are so shallow as that they would only look at a person's skin or sexual orientation or religion or whatever. They can put you in whatever kind of intersectional box that they can put you in, rather than look at you by what resides inside. Well, as I said, Trump put out, as I was saying prior to my little mess up, the libs decided, because of the fact that Donald Trump issued that 48-hour ultimatum, and then all of a sudden this morning, he puts down on his docket, on his schedule, he says, executive time. Well, the rumors started to go wild. What is this executive time? What is it? And shortly thereafter, after finding out about that, what did the leftists say? Oh, hey, this is awesome. He's in Walter Reed Hospital. That's right. Ed Idiot Krasenstein. Yeah. Ed Idiot Krasenstein was the first one to point it out, because Trump called a lid on communicating with the public at like 11 a.m. today, and he didn't head off to Mar-a-Lago. And so everybody's kind of like, well, the leftists anyway, are kind of like, oh my gosh, what's going on? What's going on? And so Ed, Fantasy Idiot Krasenstein, he goes, breaking, speculation is rising that Donald Trump is at Walter Reed Medical Center. He posted that on X. I have that idiot blocked. I have his brother, the other idiot, blocked. Because those people, those two are just complete, utter stupid morons, and I have no time in my day to entertain those idiots. But anyway, someone apparently even went so far as to spread a video suggesting that it showed emergency vehicles showing up at the, showing up wherever, but showing emergency vehicles. However, that was quickly debunked as an older video of Trump being released from a hospital after being shot in Butler, Pennsylvania. So, yeah. Anyway, a DC photographer debunked, by the way, this guy frequently covers the White House. He debunked it. And he's like, there's nothing to indicate this. There's nothing to indicate this at all. And the legacy media then, of course, finally kicked in and started debunking it. And started noting that things like, oh, there's a Marine sentry standing guard outside the West Wing, which means that President Trump is present in the Oval Office. So even Trump debunked it after a while because he sent out a post on Truth Social where he talked about a massive strike that they had just taken out a bunch of Iran's military leaders. Even the White House Rapid Response account on X grabbed Ed Krastenstein's post and he followed right along, or whoever runs that followed right along with my thought, because he put in, no, you're just a weapons grade moron. Anyway, well, Trump, shortly after these rumors, he started talking about the Iranian military leaders being terminated in a strike. And he, this is just hours after he issued that 48-hour ultimatum, by the way. Earlier in the day, Trump had warned the looming consequences, like I said, the 48 hours. And then he says many of Iran's military leaders who have led them poorly and unwisely are terminated, along with much else, with this massive strike in Tehran. So apparently there was a strike. U.S. and Israeli forces continuing strikes targeting military infrastructure and leadership. So apparently they are looking at whether or not how many and who might be gone. General Ali Abdullah Abadi, I don't know. Anyway, he says the doors of hell will be opened to you if Iran's infrastructure is attacked. Late Saturday, as a response to Trump's renewed threat, the state media reported. So, yeah. So there you go. Trump's not in it. Now, really quickly, I do want to address, there is still a pilot that is reportedly missing. However, there are unconfirmed reports that he has been in communication with our military in the region and that he is on the run. He is using, obviously, his search and rescue and evading training in order to stay alive. But those are unconfirmed reports. There's also unconfirmed reports that a special forces unit is in the area waiting for essentially waiting for his communication again in order to pinpoint where he is and rescue him. So even though it may seem like he is behind, obviously he's behind enemy lines, but even though it may seem like he might be in trouble, he doesn't seem to be in that big of a trouble. I mean, it kind of sucks. He's behind enemy lines with no support at this point, but they are searching for him, and they may have a bead on where he is. So there's some positive news for what's going on there. And again, like I said, they're unconfirmed reports, so don't take them as, gospel truth. But yeah. Anyway. All right. Well, really quickly, like I said, the Artemis 2 rocket is now closer to the moon than the Earth. Now, there were apparently some challenges that occurred. Obviously, the toilet was one of them, but I didn't know this. Apparently, Artemis 2 is using Microsoft Outlook for email communications. What? Yeah. Apparently, the Outlook software program that was on Artemis 2, it was an unexpected, they called it a unexpected technical hurdle. When the Microsoft Outlook program malfunctioned aboard their spacecraft less than a day after liftoff, the New York Post reported it that that the mission commander Reed Wiseman reported an Outlook issue to Houston's mission control approximately 7 hours after the launch. He says, "I also see that I have 2 Microsoft Outlooks and neither one of those are working." I just got to say that, well, looks like even they are not immune to problems with Microsoft. All the businesses that use Microsoft, yeah, we call problems like this, where issues and challenges come up and it's unexpected like this, it's known as an undocumented feature. It's not a problem. It's not an issue. It's not a bug. It's an undocumented feature. That's what we call it in the biz. Anyway, so, yeah. And apparently Mission Control said that they were going to access the shuttle's personal computing device, the PCD, to address the malfunction. So these specialized tablets serve as essential tools for the astronauts, enabling them to handle routine communication with Earth-based personnel and review mission documentation throughout the journey. Apparently, Artemis 2 had an email problem at one point. Well, they don't now. So it apparently, whatever the issue was, it apparently has been fixed. The classic joke that I know of is, why does NASA use Linux? Because they can't open Windows in space. Go figure that out. All right. Well, something that I was going to cover late last night, but I didn't quite get to it. The United States jobs report came out, and the jobs report was exceeding expectations for March. Apparently, the United States added almost 180,000 jobs in March. It also shows that the federal workforce is continuing to contract, which basically means that we're getting smaller government and larger private sector stuff, which is, for those of us who enjoy smaller government, who believe in smaller government, who are conservatives and want smaller government, that is good news. Now, the headline with regards to the 178,000 jobs added in March, what came in well above expectations. And the composition of those numbers tells an even more important story. It tells us that private sector companies are still hiring, that federal employment is closing, and that's reinforcing a shift in where the job growth is actually occurring. Now, the places that saw the most of that increase were healthcare, construction, transportation, and warehousing. Healthcare alone added 76,000 jobs, including about 35,000 workers returning from a strike, which, again, when everybody was like, oh my gosh, the jobs report's doom and gloom for February. Well, yeah, that's because of the number of people that were on strike at the time. Now, construction adding 26,000 jobs, that makes sense because, believe it or not, winter's over and construction is going to start kicking up again. So, there you go. Transportation and warehousing rose by 21,000. They also noted that there was manufacturing also gained some as well. And so this is a good thing. Now, the unemployment rate changed very little at 4.3%. So this seems to be more of a reshift or a shifting in the marketplace, realistically. But yeah, so there you go. January payrolls were revised upward to 160,000, while February was revised down to a loss of 133, leaving the total employment slightly lower than previously reported. Now, wage growth, unfortunately, remained fairly modest. Average hourly earnings rose in March and were up 3.5% over the past year. But, of course, 3.5% more than your inflation rate of 2 or even 3 means that there is a modest wage growth, that your money goes just that much farther than it would in terms of if we had, 4 or 5, 6, or even 9% inflation like we did under the Biden administration at one point. Now, economists unfortunately did expect somewhat stronger wage growth, but that kind of shows a little bit of uncertainty about how much momentum the labor market is actually carrying right now. So the average hourly earnings for all employees on the private non-farm payrolls rose by 9 cents or 0.2% to $37.38. Over the year, average hourly earnings have increased by 3.5. So labor force participation showed little movement. Participation rate held at 61.9%, basically 62%. While the number of unemployed people remained near 7.2 million. So we're not really moving a lot. We are moving in some cases, but we're not moving a lot. So things are holding steady, which, considering the fact that the tariff people were like, oh my gosh, doom and gloom was around the horizon, the tariffs were going to kill everything. Yeah, that doesn't seem to be happening. So, anyway. Now, granted, that payroll growth was basically 18 times larger than what experts say the economy actually needs. Now, the 178,000 jobs was 3 times the consensus forecast of around 59,000, and a sharp reversal from February's revised decline of 133,000, which, of course, like I said, was dragged down by that large healthcare strike. But the headline number just understates how strong this report really is. So, again, our economy isn't really that bad. Could be better, for sure. Could always be better, but it's not as bad as what a lot of people think. Now, something that's hidden a little bit within these numbers that I want to talk about a little bit here. Something that's hidden within these numbers is something that is, well, let's just say, kind of interesting, especially in the realm of what we are with AI and all of those kinds of things. But first, before I get into that, I want to tell you about the Chicago Steak Company. So Chicago Steak Company right now is giving away 8 free steak burgers on every order. Not hamburgers. These are steak burgers. Much better meat. 8 steak burgers for free on every order. All you have to do is use the code 8 EIGHT burgers. 8 burgers. Now think about the last time that you bought burger at the grocery store, okay? You stood there staring at a wall of plastic, wrapped ground beef, trying to figure out which one isn't going to turn into a hockey puck on the grill. And maybe you grabbed the expensive organic meat pack. Maybe you decided to go cheap. Hey, barbecue season is just around the corner, I'm telling you. Either way, when you got home, you fired up the grill, you watched them shrink to half their size, and they ended up dry in the middle, falling apart through the grates. Well, the Chicago Steak Company has figured out a better way. They make a half-pound steak burger from USDA prime beef, hand-formed from premium cuts, and ship them directly to your door on dry ice. These burgers will hold together on the grill, stay juicy, and actually taste like steak. So here's the deal. If you spend $189 or more on any of the steaks that you want, take your choice, and then use the code 8burgers, EIGHT, 8 burgers, they will add 8 free steak burgers, plus they'll add a bottle of steak seasoning, plus they'll add free shipping to your order. That is a $200 value in free extras on top of whatever else you ordered. Now, Chicago Steak Company's got 15,000 5-star reviews. 15,000 5-star reviews. These people know what they're doing. They know what they're doing here. So head on over to mychicagosteak.com/rumble or click on the QR code that's on the screen right now. mychicagosteak.com/rumble. Use the code 8burgers, EIGHT burgers, and get those 8 free steak burgers, plus the bottle of steak seasoning, plus the free shipping on your order. Go and get these steak burgers and anything else that you want. Get them before they're gone. Head on over to mychicagosteak.com/rumble and don't forget to use the code 8burgers, EIGHT burgers, to get those free burgers, free steak sauce, and free shipping for your order when you spend $189 or more on any of the steaks that you want. Go to mychicagosteak.com/rumble and use the code 8burgers for that deal. All right. So I actually, in my regular 9 to 5, I actually work remotely. And I'll admit, I mean, prior to COVID, there wasn't really much of a call, although I did work remotely for COVID. But prior to COVID, I think a lot of people didn't realize what the advantages are when working remotely. And while COVID, the ending of COVID, brought back a flurry of, hey, you better return to your offices and start working, that hasn't really killed the remote work. And from this jobs report, there was an analysis done saying that remote job postings actually have risen 20% in the first quarter of this year. Now, the top 5 remote positions were in the project management, sales, computer and IT, and business development and operational fields. But one thing that a lot of people don't seem to understand is that remote work has its advantages. And in today's technological world where everybody is connected nowadays, I mean, even some of the most remote places on Earth are connected and interconnected. Just imagine what Starlink is doing for all these people. You could literally be in the middle of nowhere with a Starlink and being connected to your office and be able to do things like video conferencing, reportedly. Now, AI is also pushing a lot of people to this kind of scenario where you no longer necessarily need some of the lower level workers who would typically be in the office. And as the remote job market continues to evolve, the report states, both employers and job seekers are adapting to new expectations around flexibility, compensation, and long-term career growth. Now, granted, not every single job is going to be able to be remote work. Not every single job can actually function as a remote work job. There are jobs that you have to be on site to be able to do the work. But the thing about it is rather what a lot of these companies are finding is rather than throwing out a job app or a job ad seeking applicants within their geographical space, they're finding that because people are much more connected, much more internet savvy, and much more capable, they're finding that they can hire people across the United States or even the globe who are much more qualified rather than just having to rely upon whoever can show up at the office. So this is a positive development in the job market if you are looking at things like remote work. Now, according to the findings, mid-career professionals are leading the market with 65% of remote positions targeting experienced workers. Now, during the first quarter, according to the report, top 5 remote positions were, like I said, project management, sales, computer and IT, business development, and operational fields, with sales and business development sector showing the highest gains for remote work, with salaries often exceeding $100,000 annually. Senior product managers, data engineers, and senior software engineers can earn an average of more than $130,000 a year, while product managers and product marketing managers can garner an average $105,000 annual salary. Now think about this. Rather than living in a high cost of living space like, San Francisco or New York City or Los Angeles, you could live in Fargo, North Dakota, low cost of living, and be connected to the internet with remote work. This can result in a lot more satisfying experience for not only the employee, but also the employer. And one downside to all of this remote work is the older style of management, which is essentially that, we want to, make sure that your butt's in the seat. If we can make a societal shift to where you're no longer being required to attend, the 8 to 5 Monday through Friday, and that your results, your work results, are actually being determined based off of your productivity. Well, I can imagine that, or I can envision that this remote work situation could potentially even get greater results. Because what you end up with is people who are much more satisfied with work. They can be online relatively instantly, especially in emergency situations, because they live and work in their home. And you also have potentially a better quality of life for people who are doing the remote work, because now especially if they're not being held to the standard Monday through Friday 8 to 5 kind of scenario and are being judged or evaluated based upon their productivity and not so much how many hours they sit online, you could find where you would be getting people with a high degree of talent who are able to perform the job function to a high degree of efficiency. And both the employer and the employee are much happier for it. So to be honest with you, I'm tending to applaud this because also, too, keep in mind, there are people like myself who don't really go in for the, hey, I got to hang out with all of my work buddies kind of thing. Because these types of people that usually are able to take remote work on like this are usually the types, and especially the ones that make it successful, are usually the types that are in the basket of, I work to live. I do not live to work. And that is a complete change in the attitude toward doing these kinds of things. So, yeah. Now, the report also demonstrated that data is showing and indicating that more than a third of employees would hesitate to apply for a role that requires full-time in-person requirements. Remote work remains strongest in established high-impact functions that support core business operations and growth, the report added. And some fields, unfortunately, are experiencing slower growth for remote options, including accounting and finance positions, product jobs, education and training jobs, and medical and health careers. Well, some of those, of course, you can't really necessarily diagnose somebody across a teleprompter, for an example. But that being said, there is a lot to being able to work remotely and be able to do your job remotely. And especially when it comes to finding the talent that is available across the world marketplace versus what you can only find within your geographical location. And some companies are discovering that in certain markets and certain places is much more, shall we say, palatable that way. Anyway. All right. Well, let's move in on this this idea of gas prices and its impact. So let me go ahead and we'll just go ahead and do the question of the week a little early, but that's because it's going to get kind of involved here. So here we go. All right, tonight's question of the week comes from Coco. I think I've seen Coco in the chat, so here you go, Coco. Coco says, hey, Whiskey, could you do a deep dive on gas prices, explaining geopolitical risk premiums and energy supply shock, and how this Iran conflict is creating a fear of supply disruptions? Hey, Coco, I'll see what I can do for you. All right, so first of all, you need to understand that everything in terms of petroleum products, we have a huge environment on petroleum, built and based on petroleum. And in fact, if anybody has listened to the television show Landman, not saying that it's 100% accurate, but there's a lot of truth within the first season where they're explaining a lot of the oil industry. See, we in America, we seem to think of oil as, that's just the stuff that we lubricate our cars with. It's the stuff that turns into gasoline. It's, diesel fuel. It's basically fuel and lubrication products. Yeah, that's just the tip of the iceberg. See, petroleum-based products are in pretty much everything. everything just about made from plastic is a petroleum product. Just about every single electronic has parts and pieces that are made from petroleum products. Even as much as our clothes, such as the polyester, the nylon, the rayon, all of those products that are not natural have some degree of petroleum in them. You also have petroleum touching just about everything from distribution to manufacturing to, raw based products. Just about everything in our lives today is made in some capacity or touches in some capacity petroleum across the board. Petroleum itself is in high demand. And it's more so than just the gasoline that you put in your car or the diesel that somebody is running. Petroleum is in everything. And so when the price of petroleum goes up, when the demand for petroleum goes up and the supply is restricted, that is usually where you will see the prices increase. Most of the time at like the gas pump. The gas pump is someplace that we see it. It's a very real number for us because it is a simplified format to basically look at and be able to understand the impact of petroleum products on our lives when it comes to gas prices. Now, when you see things like Amazon, for an example, because they use their petroleum products in terms of distribution, not so much in terms of the manufacturing of the product, but the distribution of the product, as gas prices and fuel prices go up, well, prices on just about everything goes up. Because again, in order to distribute a product, you're talking about anything from planes, trains, to automobiles and trucks. Across the board, every single time your package changes hands and travels from where it landed or was manufactured, and this is even worse, even more impactful when you're talking about products that come from offshore, like China. You have the oil in the tank or the shipping products, the shipping company, the boats that bring it from those other places, or if it happens to go by air, the airplanes that bring it there. You have the trucks that distribute it across the United States after it arrives at the dock. Of course, you have all of the petroleum that is in the things such as the cranes that have to offload the ship. I mean, I could go on and on and on. Petroleum is everywhere. But typically what ends up happening is you'll have places like Amazon or UPS or even the United States Postal Service that'll tack on fuel surcharges when fuel gets to be above what the average expected was for delivery of a product, like what you see in Breitbart here. Amazon has tacked on or is tacking on a 3.5% fuel surcharge for sellers. And what do you think that's going to do? You have a fuel surcharge for the seller. What do you think the seller's going to do? They're not going to eat that because they want to keep selling. They're going to bump their prices up. See, this is part of the reason why understanding Simple Economics 101 in this particular case helps you to understand where pricing comes into play. You have cost, you have price. Those are different. Nobody that I know of in business is going to eat the cost of something and not have it reflected in their price, because that cuts into profits. That's not what they want. That's not what you're looking for. But I digress. Let me get back to your question. So oil prices by themselves and gas prices by themselves are affected. If we just focus directly on the gasoline and diesel, okay, there are a lot of factors that go into the gasoline and diesel prices, the fuel prices. And this is the same for like aircraft maintenance or aircraft fuel as well, jet fuel and things like that. Let me go ahead and show you this chart right here. Let me see if I can get it. Yep, there we go. Oop, too far. Well, if you take a look at these two gas pumps as an example, they give you a breakdown, a rough breakdown of what goes into the price of a gallon of gasoline or diesel. In this particular case, this example is demonstrating about half of that price is crude oil. The other half is what goes into the distribution, the marketing, the federal and state taxes, which we'll get to here in just a few minutes, and the refining costs, and of course, the profit that is being derived. Basically, again, we're talking about the cost of goods and services here. This is back to Econ 101. You have your cost of a product, and then you have your price, and the differential is generally determined to be your profit margin, okay? Gross profit margin. So anyway, as I was saying, you have roughly 52%-ish, it varies depending upon who you're talking to, in terms of the cost of the crude oil. And that makes up the larger portion of the actual price that you see at the gas pump. Now, as we all know, the price of crude oil can sometimes be incredibly volatile. So when you have conflicts like what you have over in the Middle East, and keep in mind, OPEC by itself supplies roughly 40% of the global supply. Okay. And I'll explain to you why they are so impactful here. But OPEC, which is a conglomeration actually of nations, largely in the Middle East, those OPEC nations are the ones that generally will go and set the price for a barrel of crude. And it's that price for that barrel of crude that is inherently figured or estimated, or I should say accounted for within this pricing. Now you have federal and state taxes, which roughly comprise about 16 to 17% of the total price. You have distribution and marketing, which is roughly around 16 to 18% of that total price. And then, of course, your refining costs are anywhere from 14 to 15% of that final 48% roughly. Okay? Now, why you see differences in state to state. For an example, here in the United States, you can go to Texas and you can find prices for gasoline in Texas, $1, $2, $3, sometimes, depending upon the cost of gas elsewhere, lower than other places in the country, such as California, New York, Washington, Oregon. And a lot of that comes from the federal and state taxes. See, the federal taxes are pretty much across the board. The federal taxes are typically around, as soon as I can find my chart here, the federal taxes are generally like around, what is it? I think I saw like 15 cents per gallon, 15 to 16 cents per gallon, I think was the number that I saw. And then your state and local taxes are over the top of that. For an example, as of Wednesday, April 1st, AAA data stated that the national average for gas was $4.06. However, in California, which has some of the highest gas taxes in the nation, theirs was $5.89 per gallon on average. Hawaii had an average of $5.46. Washington had an average of $5.36. So, Oregon, $4.96 on average. And it kind of goes down from there. Now, keep in mind, you also have not only state taxes, but you potentially have lower or local taxes, as well as some states have sales tax, other states do not. And so all of these numbers go into the price of the gasoline. There's also a distance from the refineries. So let's talk about this crude oil, first of all. Okay. And the reason why I want to talk about crude oil is that there's actually different types of crude oil. And each type of crude oil has a different price. But it also has a different how long it takes and how much work is put into refining it into something such as gasoline or diesel. Now, crude oil has different types. And the first way to grade crude oil, you look at this chart right here, or this image right here, and I'll zoom in. You have what's known as weight. So the weight of the crude oil is a big factor. And by this weight of crude oil, they're talking about the, they call it the API gravity. Let me see what the API, see if I can, anyway, I don't know what the API stands for. It doesn't say. It's the American Petroleum Institute. That's what it is. So you have the American Petroleum Institute grading with gravity, and it's a scale. And this scale basically means that a heavier crude, which has a lower API, and a lighter crude, which has a higher API. Now, a lighter crude is easier to refine because it doesn't have a whole bunch of other material that we're not interested in. And so a lighter crude oil will have a easier time in the refining process to get it to its final product, whether it's gasoline or diesel or whatever, versus things like a heavier grade of oil. Now, the weight of the crude, it will also depend on where it's been picked up from. For an example, the stuff that comes out of West Texas, that is a lighter crude weight. That is a lighter weight of oil. So it's much easier for us in terms of the U.S. to refine it and get it into its final product. Now, there's another part to this as well. Have you ever heard of the term sweet crude? Sweet crude means, and whether it's sweet or sour, that is referring to the amount of sulfur that is contained in the raw product. Now, sweet crude has very low levels of sulfur, well under 1% of sulfur, where sour crude can have as much as 1.1 to 2% of sulfur. Now, sulfur, for those of you that don't know, is a bad byproduct when it's burned. Okay? So the best oil from the ground, the best raw product that is out there, is a light, sweet crude. And unfortunately, light and sweet crude only come from a few places. Now, that being said, because it is easier to refine, that particular type of raw oil, crude oil, is more expensive. So you have more expensive crude oil, then you add on the refining process, and that is one of your larger parts in terms of the manufacturing of the gasoline in terms of the cost. Now, there's also another total acid number that is involved in this. It's a third metric that is in there. If the crude has a higher TAN number or total acid number, producers must use a more robust metallurgy than what is standard. So their processes can handle the corrosivity of it. In other words, they have to have a specialized equipment to handle the more corrosive product. So a lower tan number is better. So your absolute ideal oil is light, sweet, and a low tan count. That is your premier oil. Now, not every refinery, by the way, is able to handle anything but a light, sweet, low tan number oil. So depending upon the refinery's capabilities, depends on what type of oil that they can take. For an example, we just took over, there's been talk of us taking over things like Venezuela's oil. We just took tankers from Venezuela. Well, Venezuela doesn't have a light, sweet, low tan number oil. They actually have more of the opposite. They have the sour, darker, or what is it? Not heavy is the opposite. Light and heavy. So they have a heavier, sour oil base. And so it would require a lot more refining in order to get it to our standards. And so this is part of the problem, is that depending upon, and by the way, too, all of the burn-off standards, the EPA standards, the emission standards, all of that stuff goes into whether or not the raw oil can be either a heavier sour oil with a high tan count versus the light, sweet, and low tan count oil. I know, it's yeah. So, all of that stuff, by the way, again, all of this goes into where we buy and purchase oil from. Because where we buy an oil from also gives us a indication in terms of where we pick this stuff up. Now, the stuff that comes from OPEC is generally lighter and sweeter than some of the other places in the world. And so because of that, that's why they have a higher count of and more control over the price of a crude barrel of oil moving forward. Now, I had a chart at one point that showed where the area, yeah, here it is. So here is a chart of where these oils, many of these oils are taken from. So for an example, places like Venezuela, Mexico, those two places in particular, they have a higher sulfur content and have a heavier gravity number. So it's harder to refine those oils than, for an example, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, UAE, the United States. Again, Saudi Arabia is, they're into the light oils. So again, the OPEC ones are the ones, Oman, they're the ones that have the most ideal, oil for refining. And so this is why they have so much of a lockstep on the oil. Now, it also depends on how much they pull from the ground and put into their supply chain. So the more that they pull from the ground, obviously, and supply is greater than demand, then you end up with lower prices for a barrel of oil because there's more barrels of oil to be had. Whereas when OPEC would go and say, yeah, we're not going to pull as much from the ground anymore, and so our supply is going to go down, well, then demand increases, and now you have demand for this type of oil goes up, and it becomes a higher cost. And now, not only do we have the standard supply and demand from OPEC at this point, we also now have Hormuz closure, which again handles 1/5 of the world's oil. You have people like Saudi Arabia having to pipe that stuff instead of ship it out of their shipping ports through the Strait of Hormuz. And so now they're having to pipe it across to the other side of their country, and that can't do as much as they can load up onto ships and get them through the Strait of Hormuz. So not only do you have the closure of the strait, but you also have less oil being shipped or transported because they have to transport it via an alternative method in order to get it out. So all of this stuff is affecting the products, okay? All of this stuff is affecting the product. And keep in mind, too, that not everybody uses the same level of oil or the same quality, same level of oil that we do. So you also have factors such as how far away you are from the refineries and the distribution plants, okay? Because, say, for an example, most of our refineries here in the United States are actually along the Gulf Coast. That's also where our Strategic Petroleum Reserve actually is as well. And so it's along the Gulf Coast. Anywhere that you go outside of the Gulf Coast, as you move northward and either westward or eastward, you end up with not having any refineries. And so therefore the crude can't be shipped there. It has to be refined first and then shipped safely. And so you have to add all of those shipping costs to it as well. You do have refineries on the West Coast, like California, for an example, but California, because of all their regulations and requirements for all of their emissions and everything else, they can only take a specific type of crude oil in order to refine. They have zero connectivity to the rest of the United States, so it has to all be done on trucks, which, of course, you have California taxing truckers and putting trucking emissions on hold and things of that nature. And so you really have a bit of a problem with California in particular being able to ship all of their oil or petroleum products that they make to the rest of the country. So, yeah. It's, our biggest problems, the two biggest problems that we have, number one is the crude oil. And number two, it has to deal with refineries and distribution. See, as I told you, if you recall, we had that article about that one refinery that just finally got approved to be built and just broke ground. We haven't had an actual refinery built in the United States since the 1970s until this past one here within the last 6 months. And so we are really lagging behind big time in terms of our refining capabilities, because the refining plants that we do have, most of them have, gone through some upgrades, but if they go to upgrade based on the federal laws, if they go to upgrade these things, they have to then conform with the newest federal law, which of course Joe Biden put into place and caused all kinds of problems. And so companies were just like, yeah, we're not going to upgrade our refineries because they're operating within the law at the time that the refinery was last upgraded or built. And so we're okay with that for right now. But unfortunately, when you don't upgrade your systems and bring them up to date, you can't necessarily add capacity or capability to the product. And so this is where we run into a bit of a problem. We just don't have the amount of refining that we do need in order to be able to consume the number of oils that we have. Now, you recall during COVID and that we ended up a lot less, but our average consumption of oil is something like 20 to 25 million barrels of oil per day. And as you recall, when Biden was releasing the Strategic Petroleum Reserves, they could only pump out 1 million barrels per day. So it wasn't even a drop in the bucket compared to our consumption. And so our biggest problem that we have right now, not only in terms of being able to become energy independent here in the United States, we need to not only do we need to up our refinery capabilities, but we also need to up our transport capabilities, which is why that pipeline coming from Alaska through Canada into the Americas was a huge deal. When that thing got killed by the Biden administration, that was horrible in terms of our capability to be able to transport the crude oil to get it to refineries to actually refine the oil. The capacity is limited by the amount of trucks and rail that we have now. A pipeline doesn't take the same kinds of gas to move the exact same amount of oil as, say, a long train or semi-truck convoy would. And so it costs more to send oil through railway and shipping and semis versus doing it through a pipeline that would have made things a whole heck of a lot easier. So all of these things are keeping us trapped and dependent upon the price of oil in terms of the world price of crude, whether it's West Texas, Brent crude, or there's one other one that's in particular that are the indicators. All three are the indicators across the board. So this is part of the reason. Plus, you also have speculators who are driving the price up. They're buying more, more shares or whatever, and it's driving the price of per share or per barrel up. They're speculating on, how much, how long the Iran war is going to, or Iran conflict is going to go on, how much it's going to affect the world's supply and demand and everything else. And all of those factors go into the pricing of the oil and unfortunately impact us in terms of at the gas pumps. And so while we have some capability of controlling some of it, because if we did all of a sudden release a whole bunch of our crude into the global marketplace, we could potentially bring down the cost of oil. However, that could end up being a bit of a detriment on our side because, of course, we would end up selling our oil for cheaper, which isn't quite exactly what we would necessarily want, even though in the long run, it might increase the amount of supply. So the target for most of the time, the target for a barrel of oil is less than right in the realm of $90 to $95, $100 a barrel. If we increase our pricing too much, what ends up happening is, as the television show Landman points out, that if we increase the oil supply too much, then the cost of getting the oil out of the ground outweighs the profit, and the price point ends up being a bit of a problem. So you see when the oil prices bottom out at $75 to $80 a barrel, or even lower, it becomes a bit of a problem for all of these oil companies. Their sweet spot is somewhere between, I think if I recall correctly, somewhere between $80 to $95 a barrel is the sweet spot where they can make their money and they can provide a product that pretty much everybody is kind of happy with. And that's basically how that works. Very broad stroke overhead view, but I do thank you for that question. And that is a long question of the week, but hopefully that answered most of your questions, if not all of them, Coco. So, anyway. Oh, well, that brings us to the end of the show. A little early, but it does bring us to the end of the show. So do me a favor, if you haven't already, head on over to rumble.com, get yourself an account. It is free. And once you are signed up and signed in at Rumble, search up the American Perspective channel and hit that green follow button to get notified every time that I go live. Also, too, don't forget that if you're already in, hit those thumbs up, thumbs downs, or in the case of 3 Chevy, the thumb sideways. Across all of my platforms, whether it's X, YouTube, Facebook, or, of course, the aforementioned Rumble. We will see you Monday, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, right here on American Perspective. Have a great Easter Sunday. Make sure that you put in a few prayers, rejoice in the fact that our Lord has risen, that he rose from the dead and is living to come back to our earth once again. May God bless us all, and may God bless America, and may God bless all of you. And good night, everybody.